Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We are going to start in maybe just a minute just to give some more folks a chance to join. As folks are joining, we're going to give it maybe another minute just to let a few more folks to join, and then we'll get started. Thank you all. Okay, it's 12:02, so we will go ahead and get started. I'm sure some additional folks will be joining us. I wanted to welcome everyone to the Illinois Action for Children FY27 Legislative Session Review. My name is Angela Farwig. I am the Vice President of Public Policy Advocacy and Research here at Illinois Action for Children. And we do have Spanish interpretation available today. So I'm going to move us on to the slide with that. And we'll hear from Alejandro, our interpreter.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I'm just going to give the instructions for Spanish interpretation. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Alejandro y yo soy el intérprete de esta sesión. Muy rápido les explico cómo activar la interpretación si es que prefieren escuchar con interpretación en español. Si están en una computadora, en la parte de abajo de la pantalla van a ver un icono de un globo, como un mapa mundi. Denle clic a ese icono y luego nos dice interpretación. Si no aparece el icono, hay que darle clic a los tres puntos que dicen más, luego interpretación y luego español. Si están en un celular o iPad o tablet, algo así, uno tiene que tocar la pantalla para que aparezca un menú en la parte de abajo. Luego le dan clic a los tres punticos que dicen más. En ese menucito que aparece, ubican donde dice interpretación. Le dan clic a interpretación, luego español y luego en la parte de arriba, donde dice algo como listo o finalizar. Y cualquier cosa, coméntenme y yo les ayudo. All right, we should be set.
Muy bien, gracias.
No, de nada.
Thank you, Alejandro. Welcome, Margarita. And so if at any point, folks, we need more Spanish, just let us know, but those are the instructions. And I think will we be putting those in the chat, Alejandro? I'm not sure. And then we will go ahead and move. Oh, there they are. We will go ahead and move over to our agenda.
Hi, everybody. My name is Crystal Salas, Policy Associate at Illinois Action for Children. I'll be getting us initiated here by going over our agenda and a couple of ground rules for today's presentation. So today we will begin by welcoming everybody in the chat with a icebreaker. We will be going over the state budget, review important state legislation, the latest updates with the Illinois Department of Early Childhood, and how to keep the momentum going. So before we get into all of this great information, we know that throughout this presentation, you will more than likely have some questions, and we're excited to hear those. However, we do ask that you hold yourself from unmuting at that moment. We have set some reserved time after each section where we are able to respond to those questions. But if you are afraid of forgetting your questions or you really want to ask that question at that moment, we do encourage you to drop those questions in the chat and we will either try to get to those at that moment or we will come back to them. Next slide, please. So, welcome once again. Thank you for joining us. Help us understand a little bit more about who's joining us here today. So please type your name and your organization if you come with one in the chat. Also, help us by answering this icebreaker. We would love to know what would be your walkout song and why? And then feel at this moment, do feel free to unmute yourself and share if you'd like. So I encourage you to go ahead and put your information in the chat. I can go ahead and give you an example as we wait for people to put that information in the chat. So like I said, I already introduced myself. I'm Crystal with Illinois Action for Children. And my walkout song would be Marathon by Becky G, specifically just because it's my go-to running song at the moment.
All right. I'll take the opportunity to come off mute as well. Like I mentioned, I'm Angela Farwig from Illinois Action for Children. My walkout song, as folks know, I do spend a lot of time watching baseball games, so I do love a good walkout song. I think right now there is a song by a band called Walk the Moon. It's called Shut Up and Dance. It's a little bit old right now, but I've been doing a lot of dancing around my house, and so that's what I'm feeling right now.
And then we have folks joining us from Grief Care Network, Kristen James. Um, we have Brenda from Family Focus, who her walkout song would be Anything Bad Bunny. I agree. Chelsea from EITP, University of Illinois. She can't think of a walkout song at the moment. We have Dawn from Cell Community Service, and her walkout song would be On Sunshine, as I always try to bring sunshine wherever I go. I love that. Definitely love that. Becky from Bird to Five, walkout song would be Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel. So thank you everybody for answering our icebreaker and joining us today. So if we can just go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. All right. So you'll probably hear us thanking you guys a lot throughout this presentation, but once again, thank you once again for joining us today, and thank you for joining us throughout this year as we make a difference in early childhood policy. It's because of your advocacy that over 100 Illinoisans took action and 324 messages were sent to elected officials in the General Assembly, requesting for increased investments in early childhood. As well, nearly 300 advocates attended this year's Advocacy Day in May. This is amazing. And in our social media messages across Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we received over 3,413 likes, comments, and shares. Once again, this is amazing work, and this is all done because of you guys. You guys all deserve a round of applause for everybody who's here and for everybody who couldn't join us today. But thank you. And I'll now be passing it back to my colleague Angela Farwick, who will take us on to our next portion of today's webinar.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks for everyone putting those songs in the chat. That is just really fired me up today. So thank you for sharing that. So we're going to review the FY27 budget that was passed by the General Assembly, and then we will be going through key early childhood line items as well. So as an overview of the budget, folks may remember that back in February, as every year, Governor Pritzker proposed the FY27 budget. That budget overall was framed as what is called a maintenance budget, generally speaking, where no major cuts, but there were increases to programs as required, and really trying to maintain Illinois programs and services in the face of federal funding cuts and other fiscal uncertainties. So the proposed FY27 budget had a very slight increase, 1.6%. So fast forward into the end of May and actually the early hours of June 1st, the General Assembly did pass a total FY27 budget just under $56 billion. And that is $700 million more than was in FY26. So again, sort of a small increase when you look overall at that almost $56 billion budget, but an important increase. The budget that was passed includes most of the governor's priorities. A few other key things that passed in the General Assembly were one-time funding for a food benefits program that we will discuss when we review the bills going forward, and 800 million in new revenue. And so there was a push to identify new sources of revenue to support services for Illinois children and families. And so a package of revenue proposals were passed. Those include a digital advertising tax, a social media tax, and some changes in how corporate taxes are collected. And so those revenue increases were really aimed at generating more revenue. I'm sorry, those taxes were aimed at generating more revenue and trying to ensure that that burden didn't fall on Illinois children and families. We also saw in the budget a small increase to the CCAP Child Care Assistance Program and our early intervention programs, while other early childhood programs received level funding. We can go to the next slide. So overall, as early childhood advocates, we did advocate for increased funding for early childhood programs. Across the board, we were looking for a $180 million increase, or about a 5% increase. And what was in the approved budget here was a 70 million increase across those two programs that I mentioned, the Child Care Assistance Program and Early Intervention, for about a 2% increase. Go to the next slide, please. So we're going to go through a couple early childhood programs and walk through these slides. One important thing to note that we will be discussing in more depth later is this is the first year that we have the Illinois Department of Early Childhood proposing sort of making a budget request and getting funding for all of the programs that they will be administering in just about in a week from today. So that's a key change, that all of these programs, the funding for these programs that we're going to go over, will be housed in the Illinois Department of Early Childhood. This line item is the operations budget for the new Department of Early Childhood. And so you see a sizable increase from what was in the FY 2026 budget. Again, this is as IDEC prepares to launch administering programs and transitioning of staff over to IDEC. The overall state early childhood budget of programs that IDEC will be administering is about $2 billion in program funding that will be administered. So yeah, and I'll just name that the FY 27 budget for operations for IDEC is just under $86 million. We can go to the next slide. So now we're going to look at the Child Care Assistance Program, also known as CCAP. We did see an increase in the Child Care Assistance Program, a 7% increase, or $55 million. This additional funding aims to support childcare for up to 155,000 Illinois children. So this is really trying to maintain the momentum that that program has, ensure it can reach the families that are applying for it, and support, again, 155,000 children. It also includes reimbursement rate increases for home-based childcare providers. So those increases were negotiated by the union that represents those folks. We in our advocacy did advocate for additional funding for the Child Care Assistance Program to support a center-based rate increase. That was not included in the final budget, but we will continue to be advocating for that and listening and talking to childcare providers going forward. Go to the next slide. Early intervention also saw an increase in the budget, which is great news. It was about a 9% increase, or $15 million. And this increased investment is really aimed to improve operational infrastructure and try to reduce some of those service delays that we know families with infants and toddlers with developmental delays and disabilities are experiencing. So we were really glad to see that. That didn't quite reach the level of our advocacy ask, but again, a really important investment in the state budget in a tough budget year. Next slide, please. Smart Start Childcare. So Smart Start Childcare in the Illinois budget includes 3 programs: Smart Start Workforce Grants, Smart Start Quality Support, and Early Childhood Apprentice Program. The Smart Start Workforce Grants is the major part of that funding stream. It is $200 million that is funded in state funding. We know lots of providers are accessing that program to support compensation increases for childcare educators. We in our advocacy did advocate for additional funding to be devoted to this line item to support the Smart Start childcare workforce grants. Again, that was flat funded in the budget from last year at $200 million. And we know that this is a really important program and that providers are really seeing it as an important part of their funding. And so we are monitoring, how that's implemented and trying to see if we need to be doing some additional advocacy here to just ensure that all the providers that are eligible for that program can benefit from it. So again, a really important workforce compensation strategy in our state that we at Illinois Action for Children fully support.
Stone from a meaningful walk.
We can go to the next slide. This is the Early Childhood Block Grant. Folks may recall it has been administered by the State Board of Education. It will now be administered by Department of Early Childhood. This funding supports preschool and infant toddler programs, and it was part of the multi-year Smart Start plan that Governor Pritzker announced a few years ago that was really aimed at expanding preschool access. However, due to funding constraints in the fiscal environment, funding increases for the block grant were paused in FY26 and this fiscal year as well. So that's been level funded for the last 2 years. Again, we were advocating for additional funding in this program, but right now it was level funded for FY27. Next slide, please. Home visiting. So I'm going to spend a moment on this slide. Generally speaking, we have shared that home visiting programs were level funded in the FY27 budget. And that is true. However, the actual line item in the FY27 budget, it does have a slight increase, a $500,000 increase. And that is in there because the state funds home visiting in our state through state and federal dollars. And in this fiscal budget, there was some federal funding that was used for home visiting that was prioritized for other areas. And so the state wanted to keep that program whole. And so it moved $500,000 of state money into that budget. So that state funding line that we track does have that slight increase, but there is no additional program funding for home visiting in the FY27 budget. I think we can go to the next slide. Yes. And I know I said that we would be talking about all these programs that will be administered by the Department of Early Childhood. We also have one program that is actually not administered by the Department of Early Childhood, and that is the Early Childhood Access Consortium for Equity, or ECACE scholarships. Those are administered by the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, but this is a targeted scholarship program for childcare educators that are in the field that want to go back to school to get their degrees and credentials. So a really important workforce support. This was a program that was started through federal dollars. And then as those were spent down, the state has been allocating $5 million for this scholarship program. And that's been level funded the last few years. And it was level funded again this year. We did advocate for an additional $5 million because we know that there is more demand for this program, and to ensure that everyone that has applied for a scholarship can complete their degree or credential, we've really been trying to advocate for additional money. But in the FY27, this is level funded as well. I think we can go to the next slide. That was a lot on the FY27 budget. I hope it was helpful. I hope the slides and the talking points were helpful, but I want to pause here and create some space for questions, comments, concerns. Feel free to share those in the chat or come off mute. Okay, I see Dawn's comment in the chat. I'm just going to read it. We are able to offer second classrooms for a second grant for in-home educators, providers who offer non-traditional hours. It's greatly appreciated, but I think this may have restricted this funding amount. But it is necessary to offer that would help them reach the $18 per hour wage floor. This puts a strain on the funding amount, something to advocate for next year. This is a really helpful comment. Thanks for the flag on non-traditional hours childcare. That is something that we at Illinois Action for Children have really been working on across different areas in our research team and our program team. We actually are part of a pilot to provide additional stipends to providers that are providing non-traditional hours care. So perhaps this might be part of what you're mentioning, Don. That is funding that was appropriated several years ago in the budget and has been carried over the last few fiscal years. But we definitely know, or we're exploring how we can support non-traditional hours childcare providers. And just to back up, non-traditional hours childcare generally refers to childcare that is provided sort of outside what we would say are standard work hours. So outside that, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. sort of window during the week. So early morning care, evening care, care on the weekends, overnight care, shift or flexible care, all the different ways that we know parents are working and what their schedules are looking like. And sort of thinking about how do we support providers, often home-based providers, providing this type of care. So that's definitely a priority for us. And I really appreciate you flagging that it's something to advocate for. Okay, I see a couple. Okay, Don offered more information about this stipend. Thank you, Don. Vicky, will they change the requirement for Smart Start grants? We lost our CCAP kids and now don't qualify anymore. Thanks for sharing that, Vicky. We know that that's a challenge. They are making some changes that are allowed within rule. I don't think they're changing the overall requirements of the Smart Start grants, but they are sort of trying to make some changes that they can do within rules to just ensure they stay within budget. Bree, would you like to offer anything else on this?
Sure. Yeah, I think for this year, the folks who met qualifications and were able to be awarded in round one are going to be able to continue to receive awards for those classrooms as long as you're all submitting your reporting on time. For folks who didn't qualify for round one for this year, either because you didn't meet the CCAP requirement or for other reasons, because funding is limited this year, that is, folks will not be able to get accepted this year, even if you do sort of hit that requirement later in the year. We know that this is because funding was limited. We did advocate for increased funding this year. And as Angela said, it was a really tight budget. So I think this really, while it doesn't necessarily help folks this year, it really does make a case for years to come about the need for additional funding for these grants. And sort of what requirements look like going forward. I think with IDAC taking over and looking at some of the funding, I think that's a little bit to be determined, but we want to make sure that funding is helping keep as many providers whole as possible and reaching both the providers, the workforce, and the families who need it most. And so that's going to be something that we continue to prioritize as this is all underway. So it's a tricky year for Smart Start Workforce grant funding, but it definitely builds the case for increased investment in years to come.
Thank you for the question, Vicki. Thank you, Bree. Yes.
Can I add something to that too? I was just going to say, I live in the Quad City area. So, I mean, a lot of our providers do take advantage of the grants. I mean, all of our providers that are eligible do. However, I do live in an area, Pike County, Illinois. That's my home base. So I was going to say there's a lot of problems there. I know a lot of them do not take the grants, and it's mostly because a lot of them do not take CCAP. So, I mean, that's kind of a big push that we're trying to do there to kind of, let parents know that, hey, this is available, and I know a lot of them haven't tried recently, even though there's been a lot of changes to get parents approved. So I know that's a big push too. And I know a lot of providers, like I said, downstate, I've looked at kind of the records of who is applying for these. And I noticed, downstate, it's really not very, it's very limited as to those who do. So I really think, the more that this workforce grant gets, more talked about, hopefully eventually, there'll be more providers downstate that will also take advantage of this grant. But I know that's definitely, I realize, after seeing the email yesterday that, we kind of knew that evidently the funding is limited. So we really do need to push more for that next year. I mean, these grants are so appreciated, and I've been in childcare for over 40 years. And I mean, it's really great to see that we have a governor who appreciates and values, our work that we do. Um, it's the best that it's ever been in the time that I've been here. So, but I just wanted to put that in there too, just to kind of make things aware about what's going down state as well.
Don, yeah, thank you so much for flagging that. We always want to be making sure we're supporting all areas of the state, and making sure that providers know of opportunities that are made available. I think this was a great segue. I know we're going to go into our next section here, but I really appreciate folks sharing. We will be ending our webinar today with ways you can get involved. We need your voices in advocacy. We're hearing this. We know that we need to really push to increase funding for some of these programs, including Smart Start Workforce grants. So thank you for your comments, and we can try to keep answering some questions in the chat. I'm going to hand it over, I think, to Crystal to go over some bills.
Yes, thank you, Angela. As we mentioned, we'll now be going over some important legislation that emerged from this spring 2026 session. To start off, we'll be going over some legislation that it was introduced by IDEC, the Department of Early Childhood, as we have, and we'll probably mention multiple times throughout this webinar. As you know, July 1st is IDEC's operational date, where they will be taking over the administration oversight of the state's early childhood programs and funding. And in preparation for that transition, IDEC introduced 3 pieces of legislation. So we'll be starting off with HB 1599. This legislation did successfully pass both chambers and still needs to be signed into law by the governor. But essentially, HB 1599, it designates IDEC as the state agency responsible for administering childcare, background checks, and FBI fingerprinting. These changes align with IDEC's transition of early childhood program oversight, and the effective date of this bill is July 1st, 2027, and after FBI approval is received. Until then, DCFS will continue to handle all background checks and fingerprint. So something to keep in mind is that while these changes are coming, this bill does not make any immediate changes at this moment. And we can go to the next slide, please. HB 5204. This is another bill that was introduced by IDEC, and this successfully passed both chambers, and it is as well waiting to be signed into law. So HB 5204 moves the Early Learning Council, ELC, to IDEC. Additionally, it also adds parents, caregivers, and children under the age of 5 and HESA representatives to the ELC. It also establishes provisions on ELC staffing and conflicts of interest, and it authorizes IDEC to appoint certain members to the ECA's advisory committee. And this bill also has an effective date of July 1st, 2027. Okay, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. HB 3595. This passed both chambers and is also waiting for the governor to sign into law. This is the final bill that IDEC introduced this session. This was the larger bill that many of you may be familiar with. So the goal of this bill was to redesign and better align the licensing process for providers. Therefore, there is multiple components to this bill. It addresses outdated daycare terminology, and it changes this to early care and education. It makes changes to background checks, such as allowing background checks to follow the individual when moving between early childhood settings. It also creates new framework for license exemptions called Recognized Alternative Providers, also known as RAP. And as I mentioned, this bill has many components to it. Therefore, it also has many effective dates. The terminology part of this bill, so the one that changes the daycare terminology to early care and education, will take effect on July 1st, 2026. The new licensing framework will be effective July 1st, 2028 for park districts and July 1st, 2027 for other license exempt providers. Some of these changes will also require some additional rulemaking, and the background checks will not take effect until July 1st, 2027, after, as we mentioned earlier, federal and state approvals are received. As I mentioned, this is probably a lot of information. It is a really long bill, but at the end of this section, if you have any questions, we can definitely answer those. We can go to the next slide, please. HB 2190. This passed both chambers and is also waiting to be signed into law. It ensures that at least 2 non-administrative staff members in an early childhood program are certified in first aid. So CPR and other safety trainings. The effective date is upon it being signed into law. However, we do know that there has been additional bills surrounding this bill. So to just clarify some additional information, the intent of this bill is to apply only to child care centers. There is language in the bill that could be interpreted as including child care homes. And to that, we want to let you know that IDEC is aware of this language and how it doesn't reflect the bill's intentions. And we do expect this to be addressed for it to align the original intent of this bill. Next slide. Oh, sorry.
Crystal, I'm going to jump in just to
Go for it.
reiterate what you said. Yeah, we just wanted to share the latest information about this. And what everything Crystal said is accurate, that the intent of the bill, the legislative intent is for this to apply to child care centers only. I know folks have been in touch with the governor's office and with IDEC, and we did connect with IDEC just to make sure this is on their radar. And so there is plans in the work to address this to make sure that, as Crystal mentioned, the bill language does align with the intent. So we are waiting for more information, and we will share that with you. And we believe IDEC will also be sharing more information just about what the next steps will be to ensure that this is addressed, because the bill is not intended to apply to child care homes or group child care homes, or daycare homes and group daycare homes as they're currently referred to. So just wanted to clarify that with folks on this call. Thanks.
Thank you, Angela. The next bill that we'll be going over is HB 4577. This also passed both chambers and is waiting for it to be signed into law. So this amends the Illinois School Code to include a clear definition of play-based learning within existing kindergarten provisions, and this has an effective date of once it gets signed into law. You can go to the next slide. HB 4606 also passed both chambers and is waiting to be signed into law. This creates a statewide universal newborn support system and that aims at improving and helping families navigate the maternal health care and early childhood system. Additionally, it directs the Illinois Department of Human Services, IDHS, to design, implement, and maintain a statewide universal system, UNSS. And the effective date of this bill is July 1st, 2027. You can go on to the next slide, please. HB 4587. Passed both chambers, waiting to be signed into law. This would allow childcare centers to hire individuals who are in the process of completing their educational requirements as an interim conditional childcare director for a 12-month period. It also sets restrictions where licensed childcare centers can hire no more than 2 temporary directors for every 1 existing fully qualified director, and it has an effective date of July 1st, 2027, and this bill will also require additional rulemaking. Go on to the next slide. HB 2949, the Budget Implementation Act. So for those who don't know, the Illinois Budget Implementation Act, also known as the BIMP, is a legislation that puts the state's budget into effect and helps carry out its provisions. In this particular slide, we'll be going over the FRESH program that was included. And this officially has been signed into law by the governor. So a little bit of background information, as you may recall, last year the president signed into law HR 1, which impacted several social services programs. This law included large cuts and structural changes to SNAP. It also shifted costs to states and it expanded work requirements. Due to these changes, approximately 175,000 Illinoisans were impacted by these work requirements, and the Budget Implementation Act, the BIM, included first of any state in the nation a $70 million for the creation of the families receiving emergency support for hunger, also known as the FRESH program. So this would provide a one-time 400 payment to Illinoisans impacted by the changes and the effective date. So payments are expected to start rolling out now that it has officially been signed into law in the coming weeks, with all eligible individuals hopefully receiving payments by August 1st. Next slide. So some additional policy changes that you should be aware of that happened this session. So the House passed HR 0923, which urges IDAC to study ways to reduce licensing and regulatory burdens for family childcare homes. This is a resolution and it focuses on identifying opportunities to make requirements more efficient while also still maintaining those health and safety standards. One area of study that is required with this resolution is a training and certification that can be combined or streamlined to reduce duplications. It also asks IDAC to examine how minor technical violations are handled during license renewals. And the goal is to ensure that providers who are substantially compliant and actively working to address these issues are not prevented from renewing their licenses because of minor violations. And this resolution took effect immediately upon its passing. This is the last slide. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put those in the chat. I'll give about a minute to see if anybody has any questions. If not, we can go ahead and move on to the next section.
While people are formulating their questions, I'll just share a little tidbit. That House resolution that Crystal just spoke of, was introduced by the House Minority Leader, and it was one of those things that happened late in session. So that's why it was a resolution was passed through the House, and it does take effect. And so we will stay tuned to how IDEC is planning to implement that going forward. So just a little tidbit.
And it looks like we don't have any questions coming in about any of the legislations. So I will now pass it along to my colleague Bree, who will go over the next section.
Hi, good to see lots of familiar names and faces. For folks who don't know me, I am Bree Stormer. I'm the Assistant Director of Policy and Engagement with Illinois Action for Children. And I will be taking you through some of the updates on the Illinois Department of Early Childhood, which as of today is 1 week away from taking over early childhood programs and services. So if we can go to the next slide. So we wanted to start with what you can expect on day one, 1 week from today. The answer is really that the goal is primarily to in this lead up to IDEC taking over programs and services, ensure that not too much changes so that providers, families can all kind of utilize the contacts, the forms, everything that they have been using in the past, just to make the transition as easy as possible. So families will access the same programs. Providers will largely use all of the same systems. There is a new unified grant management system called UNA for early childhood block grantees. I think 95+% of folks who are grantees of that program have already gotten in and are working through that program. And so that shouldn't be news to those grantees. And then Smart Start Workforce grants will continue to be administered through INCRA through this next fiscal year. So you'll still use all of the same systems for Smart Start Workforce grants. Um, in terms of childcare resource and referral, there's not going to be any changes to CCMS at this time. Everyone is going to continue to get paid the same way. There's a work group meeting to support short and long-term transitions, but as of now, that is all the same. Contacts are the same. Your licensing representative should be the same person. If by some chance your licensing representative, I know a couple folks personally who had theirs retire, you should be hearing from or have heard from your new rep. But as long as your rep is still on board, that you should continue to hear from them with no changes. Um, and so the big change is that the early childhood programs and services will start to be making their way over to IDEC, and we'll start to see these things roll out more slowly. So if we can go to the next slide. So what's all happening with the IDEC transition that day one? We wanted to sort of give you a sense of where that budget is coming from and a good sense of who and what might be moving over. So these first three boxes with Illinois State Board of Education, ISB, Illinois Department of Human Services, IDHS, and Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. This data was all shared at the May 11th Early Learning Council meeting. So this was before the final budget is passed, but it does give you a good sense of about how much money and people we sort of expect to see moving over. And so you can see for Illinois State Board of Education, it's that 748 million that was mentioned earlier from Early Childhood Block Grant. And the staff that support that block grant will be moving over. For Illinois Department of Human Services, it will be both state funding and federal funding moving over because CCAP is funded through state and federal sources, along with around 172 positions and 21 contracts. Again, there might be slight rounding errors in this because the final budget wasn't passed, but gives you a strong sense. And then for DCFS, there's the staffing, the contract, and the operational funds that are moving over. I will say, and as was mentioned earlier, background checks will stay with DCFS for the next year while IDEC awaits FBI approval and while they work to build out their own background check unit. So the only real new money here is the IDEC operational budget, and that's that 85 million of general revenue funds to support startup and operations. So we've heard some folks ask questions about, oh gosh, we're building this new agency. Is there a ton of new money coming in? There's some new money coming in to support that startup and operation, but much of this funding has been around in these legacy agencies. Much of the staff has been around in these legacy agencies for a very long time. And so this is really, in a lot of ways, quite stable funding. And so wanted to sort of show you where it was all coming from, and what to sort of you can expect to see moving over. So if we can go to the next slide. This is that in Spanish. Okay. So, what are our priorities for IDEC as Illinois Action for Children? What I'm going to say about this is that they're the same as our priorities have always been across the early childhood system. Nothing is really changing for us in terms of what we advocate for. It is just that we are now working with one unified agency and not three separate agencies. Which hopefully will help us become even stronger advocates for you all and what you need to do your work well and support families and children. So we're going to keep advocating for funding for early childhood programs and services. That's not going to change. We're going to keep advocating for access. We know that it is a goal of IDEC to improve processes and strengthen coordination across the system. We are going to advocate for that. We're going to listen to you and hear what's working well, what do you need to work better, and continue to push on those things. We'll continue to advocate for family support and workforce support. And so this is not changing. It is only changing where we're going. All right, next slide. So we also wanted to go into what folks can expect from the next phase of the transition. So we talked about what's not changing, and really there is a goal to keep things as streamlined as possible in this initial transition period. But if we wanted things to stay the same the whole time, we would have never changed anything. And so there is a goal still to improve processes. And so here's what IDEC has laid out as some of their short-term goals in this next period of the transition. A big one is upgrading technology and streamlining processes. I think on the slide after this one, talk about the tech talks that have been underway with IDEC and a lot of the technology that they're hoping to roll out in the months to come. They're also working really hard on the data side of things. This may not be something that all folks know, but because children access multiple early childhood programs and services, the state doesn't have a single unduplicated count of children, and that can make it hard to know how much money is being spent across the system, across all children. And so they want to get a better sense of how many children the system is serving, how that funding is going, and how that funding can be spent as well as possible to meet the needs of children. What does it actually cost to cover all these services? How can we support kids? And how many children across the system are we serving? The background check unit is a big one. So after approval from the FBI, they will be building out a background check unit and streamlining the background check process. I know in the legislative section, we talked about the fact that the background checks will now follow the individual rather than stay with the provider. And so that's going to require some changes, and they're going to be working on that as they wait for FBI approval. You may have heard about work groups. They are going to continue to meet to discuss redesign efforts. And so you'll see those on the calendar. You may be invited to participate in different redesign efforts. That is not sunsetting. That will all continue for now. And then a big one that I think we'll start to see come out in the next couple of months is that rules are going to transfer over to IDEC. So all parts of the child care system, licensing, CCAP, early childhood block grant have rules that outline how those programs should work. And a lot of them are situated in different parts of the administrative code. They all have to kind of move over to IDEC's part of the administrative code. And so IDEC has shared that they plan to update some rules to modernize them. So things like licensing rules, we know require some modernization. They'll be proposing updated rules for that. There's also places where they need to update rules because of changes that happened during this legislative session. So things like the new licensing framework, things like the background check following the individual, and things like the interim conditional director. Those all require rulemaking, and a lot of them have an implementation date of next year, specifically so that IDEC can engage in that rulemaking and the process of getting public comment. So likely lots of work to happen there in the months to come. All right, I think I have maybe one more slide. So obviously, lots going on in this space, and you'll want to stay up to date. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. Um, there are bi-weekly transition updates through the summer on Tuesdays from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. I've been going to those meetings. I found them helpful. Folks do typically have the opportunity to ask questions and get direct answers to things that are maybe bubbling up for you. The next two are this coming Tuesday, the 30th from 5 to 6, and the 14th from 5 to 6. And then tech talks have been happening monthly since March, and those materials are all posted. My understanding is that there won't be a July tech talk, but there's quite a bit there to unpack in the meantime, about the new technology and systems that are happening. And before I move us on, I just want to pause to see if folks have any questions. Oh, Maggie, I'm glad to hear that you're finding the meetings helpful as well. Oh, and Angela, thank you for lifting up. Yes, there's a brand new frequently asked questions page. And there's also a new email that you can get in touch with. I'll pull that email for folks and drop it in the chat if you have questions that you want to bring directly to IDEC. And I know when they're getting the same question over and over, the goal is to add it to this FAQ page. But let me grab that email for folks. Any other questions while I'm getting that up? If not, we can move on. All right. If we can go to the next slide, I believe I'm passing it back to Crystal.
Yes, thank you, Bree. So we know all the information that we've been giving out today's webinar has been a lot of information, but we're just going to do like a quick takeaway of what we've discussed today. So for IDEC, we know that as programs move over to IDEC on July 1st, a smooth transition is a huge priority. Budget. The state faced a tough fiscal year with limited increases to programs. However, we will continue advocating for increased budgets as we continue towards the next session. We encourage you to stay engaged. So there are many opportunities to stay engaged as programs move over to the IDEC, while it's either participating in these IDEC transition updates or staying engaged here at Illinois Action for Children to see about any upcoming opportunities. As well, we encourage you to get involved. Join these transition updates. Sign up for e-advocate. Join our We the Village coalition. Come to early childhood advocacy days. All of these do make a difference as they do show the General Assembly that this is an important issue that they should be advocating for as well. So these are some of our quick takeaways. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So our veto session. So every fall, the Illinois General Assembly holds a veto session. This is usually an opportunity where they review bills that either the governor has vetoed. Sometimes as well, they do take this opportunity to move legislation that got held back in the spring session. But essentially, the veto session gives legislators an opportunity to take further action on bills before the legislative year concludes. And this year, veto is spread across 2 months. So the first week it'll be in November, right before Thanksgiving. And then the second portion of veto will be in December after that Thanksgiving week. If we can go on and move to the next slide. And this is the We the Village slide that I will be passing it on to my colleague Naoma.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you here today. I'm going to just give you a quick overview about who we are and what we do. This is an excellent opportunity to take what you've heard and turn it into action through the We the Village Coalition. We are a statewide coalition of parents, providers, educators, advocates, and community organizations. We work together to strengthen Illinois' early childhood system. We do this by educating and engaging providers, families, communities, and other folks that are part of our wide early childhood landscape on issues of early childhood and policy. We develop providers and parent leaders through advocacy, training, storytelling, and leadership opportunities. We advocate for policies and investments that improve access to childcare, preschool, early intervention, and other early childhood services. We organize trainings, public information sessions, listening sessions, and actions and advocacy campaigns. And so we urge you to get involved in our work. To join the coalition, we'll drop some contact information in the chat, but by joining the coalition, you'll be able to receive early updates on early childhood issues and advocacy opportunities. You will be able to attend monthly coalition meetings, webinars, and community events. You'll be able to share your experiences as a parent, provider, educator, or advocate at policy tables, participate in advocacy campaigns, and you have the option to serve on We the Village's work groups and committees as well. So again, we'll drop that information into the chat, and we urge you to engage with us. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Naoma. So yes, all links have been put in the chat. So please click on those and join We the Village for those updates. If you can go on to the next slide. So stay in touch. As we mentioned, it is very important to stay in touch not only for just any incoming information that is important to the field, but just so you can stay involved in the advocacy for future budgets and future legislation that several of you have mentioned as well in the chat. So we encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter, e-Advocate. So we do post latest month-to-month updates on there, whether it's in regards to federal, state legislations, budget, any early childhood updates we do put on e-Advocate. So we encourage you to go on there. Join Providers in Action. Bree, did you want to mention a couple words about Providers in Action?
Sure. Yeah, Providers in Action is a very cool small group of both home and center-based providers. We meet every other Wednesday at noon, and we talk through all sorts of issues that really are directly impacting providers. And so we get in really deep on things like licensing challenges. We talk about things like access to funding, questions that are coming up among providers. And so this is a really great group if you are someone who's maybe plugged into a lot of places and you want to share good information and with providers in your network, and you want to bring things back to us as advocates and make sure that we're really responding to the needs of providers. So if you are interested in being a part of that, feel free to send me an email. My email is on the slide. I can chat with you a little bit more about what to expect, and we can get you on the meeting list.
And then if at any point you have any questions regarding this slide or anything happened throughout the year, please feel free to reach out to our public policy and advocacy team, which our email is here in this slide as well, and we put it on the chat. So feel free to reach out to us, and we highly encourage you to stay in touch with Illinois Action for Children. And this does conclude the end of our webinar for today. But we will be staying on for questions. So please feel free to either unmute yourself, insert any questions throughout in the chat. Otherwise, I thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you for all the great work that everybody has done throughout the year. And I thank my team who is joining us here today as well.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being with us today. Amy, if you're still on, I was responding to your question in the chat. I think it's good to know. We would, I think, encourage you to reach out to INCRA to share this experience. Hopefully they can address it for you.
Will the link to the slides be sent in the email, or was it on here in the chat?
We don't have them in the chat yet, but we will be sending it out in
Okay.
our e-advocate, and we'll be posting it on our website.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Thank you all for the work that you do too. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for the work you
Yeah.
do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and wrap up? All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.